I was at a talk a couple of weeks ago and somebody said to me, AI is not going to steal anybody's job, but people who know how to use AI are.
ChatGPT supposedly cost $4 million in electricity to train the original model. So yeah, you can't do these in a back room.
AI is just a tool to make all parts of the business more efficient. This can solve much bigger problems than how to sell more handbags and shoes, which is the problem I have in my job, right? The AI can't be curious. It has to do what it's told at the moment.
Someone was able to negotiate the price of, I think it was a car, down to $1, which was legally binding, I believe.
Hello and welcome to our podcast Business But Better, brought to you by Irwin Mitchell. I'm Charlotte Rees-John and I'm a partner and head of our retail, leisure and hospitality sector at Irwin Mitchell. So for those of you who are new to the podcast and listening in for the first time, we're bringing you all the news and stories and issues that affect your business around the world. Today, we're going to be talking about the tech revolution. To do that, I'm joined by two tech experts, Gareth Rees-John and Graham Thomson. Graham is our own Chief Information Security and Innovation Officer at Irwin Mitchell, and he has a range of experience having worked in the military and also advising our own clients on how to protect their businesses. Gareth Rees-John is Chief Digital Officer at global brand Geiger, and he basically grew up in retail, starting his career as a shopkeeper at Marks & Spencer's and moving into their digital team, and now in his current role at Geiger, advising on all areas of tech and digital. So we've got a lot to talk about around the tech revolution, everything from AI and innovation around chatbots. I think most of us have had a little go at using ChatGPT, but we've also what happened to things like blockchain and the Metaverse. So what's coming up? What's new? So Gareth, if you don't mind, I'm going to come to you first. And I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about how you're using AI at the moment in your business and what benefits you're seeing.
Well, thanks. Good question. I think there's many ways to use AI. It's a bit of an overused term generally. I think in retail tech particularly, every third party is talking about integrating AI. Every person, every salesman you talk to is talking about the new buzzword AI. I think there's very little understood about what AI actually is. I think for many retailers, it depends where you are on your evolution as a technology company and a retailer. Most retailers are there really to be expertise in the product that they sell and taking it to a consumer. And therefore, tech can be a smaller part of the organization, but a really important one as customer demands and customer interfaces change. So I think the way that we think about it at Geiger is on many levels, really, and it comes from sort of machine learning, architecture, and up into the sort of front-end large language models. If you start at the front end, the bit that everybody sort of has understood because of the burst of ChatGPT over the last couple of years and the sort of iPhone moment for AI, if you like, as it's suddenly been put into millions of people's hands and they can have a play with it. Large language models, effectively really just predicting text is all that is doing, and then learning what the best next word in the row is to put it. So that sounds very simple, but the places where we would use it are from, the usual things like chatbots. So customer service efficiencies have grown hugely because of it. Most of the queries for most retailers are about where's my order or where's my refund. They're simple queries. They need very simple data to answer them. Now, the old chatbot used to do that in a very robotic way. The nice thing about the large language models is you can define the tone of voice and the language of your brand so that the customer doesn't really even know that they're talking to a chatbot. Now, I think it's important that they do know, because I think that's about transparency. But at the same time, that's probably the most applicable use that also gains efficiency for your business. There's other areas where large language models can be utilized, like, copywriting. If you've got vast product catalogs with huge product description catalogs that need to be indexed by Google, you can use these large language models to make that more efficient, add tone of voice, add the right keywords for Google search and visibility. So that's at the sort of very top level. Then there's sort of a middle layer, I think, that sits in what we've been talking about in retail tech as personalization for many, many years. I mean, I've been in retail tech for 15 years, and we've been talking about personalization for 15 years. And the best that anybody's done is, showing you stuff you've bought before, or stuff that's like the stuff you've bought. Like the awful example of you buy a washing machine on Amazon and then they keep emailing you about washing machines for 6 months, where you're not going to buy another washing machine. And that's personalization. So I think that the AI capabilities of using the predictive analytics of behavior and then the real-time speed of associating all of those identifiers about people, for the first time we can actually deliver truly personalized journeys. Now, so areas that we'd use this would be things like, a good example is the adverts that you see chasing you around the internet after you've looked at a product on a website. People know that sort of stuff. There's been a couple of big companies that have become very rich from that sort of thing over the last 10 years. Now, with predictive AI analytics, you can see who you should show an ad to and what that ad should be on what website at what time that has the highest propensity to make that person to become a converter. So previously you'd have to spend thousands or millions of marketing dollars on putting that ad to everybody. The efficiency comes from that real-time modeling so that you can place your marketing much more efficiently, because you don't show as many people ads and you show the right people the right ad at the right time. So that's quite powerful. It's good because it's truly personalized. It's less obvious to the consumer. It feels more natural and it feels correct and relevant, I guess, with authenticity. So that's the sort of middle layer. And then at the very base of businesses, the AI really is about efficiency. I mean, there's a whole change in the way workforce management can be applied with AI, large language models, predictive analytics, machine learning, that really the first place and one of the easiest places to look at the bottom as well as the top is just efficiency in business processes. So, many retailers have got vastly complicated processes running on lots of manual intervention. Now, they might have outsourced that for cost efficiencies, or they might be still in-housing it. There's hundreds of, low-skilled jobs, even in really developed, advanced companies. And a lot of that can be done by AI. A lot of it can be done and learned. And the difference between automation and AI, the automation bit we've done for a while, people are a little bit, they're a bit nervous about it because they think that they'll lose some control. The nice thing about the AI engine is it learns from the repeated behavior, and you can train the AI to sound and do things more like aligned to your business. So I think there's many applications that we're thinking about, but rather than think of it as an AI strategy, what we're using it for and thinking about it is more of a tool. So AI is just a tool to make all parts of the business more efficient.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I was going to ask you about some of the challenges that AI poses to businesses. And I think one of the things you talked about there is people and the low-skilled jobs. So what are the challenges? Is that the key challenge around AI, the impact on people? How much human interaction is still needed with the use of AI?
And this is what's great. I mean, I'm a positive advocate for AI, and there's obviously a whole panel of people who would argue the opposite, and they're both relevant, I think, to have on the table at the moment. I was at a talk a couple of weeks ago, and somebody said to me, AI is not going to steal anybody's job, but people who know how to use AI are. So that's the way that I seem to think about it. It's that really, if you're entering the workforce now into those sorts of roles, the great thing about having this tool and being able to use this tool is that you can bring your humanity to your creativity, your empathy to that role, to solve the bigger problems. How many people are spending 30, 40% of their role on admin before they're getting to action or analysis or collaboration or creativity? It's a bit like, it's an old worn analogy in AI now, but I like it, and it's the pocket calculator thing. So I love my maths. Most tech people love a bit of maths. It's all based on that. When the pocket calculator came out, all the naysayers were like, oh, that's it. Everyone's going to not know how to do maths. It's going to ruin mathematics. We're all going to become idiots. But actually what it did is it allowed people to do more interesting maths, because some of the basic operations of maths were done by the calculator, allowing us to stretch the realms of mathematics and actually use the human mind to advance further. I mean, we're doing it already a lot, and I think there's real opportunity in the workforce. And I think it won't be like a shock to many people because, like all these sorts of technologies, they sort of weave into our lives without us knowing it. Like people are like, I'm scared of AI. I'm like, do you use Google Maps? Probably one of the most advanced user-facing pieces of AI technology that's working at the moment. And they're like, oh yeah, I really love that. And so I think there's a fear of the impact on the workforce. I don't think there should be a fear, but there should be a cognizant understanding of the impact for your business and how you can make roles more interesting and how you can make sure that your workforce understands how they can use it, get them to play with it, how, open doors, be curious. That's what the AI can't do. The AI can't be curious. It has to do what it's told at the moment. Anyway.
I think that brings us quite nicely onto some perhaps of the legal challenges, if I can bring you in there, Graham. Some are already pinging in my mind. So what do you think some of the legal challenges, what Gareth's been talking there, so around data collection and around the people and the interaction and the empathy and the things that AI can't do?
Yeah, sure. There's definitely a lot of consideration. So I like to separate AI into two main kind of categories. So you've got traditional AI, which is about prediction. It's about analyzing big data for classification or recommendations. And that's very much in the analytics arena. And there's been some research that businesses that use big data analysis, and particularly using AI for big data analysis, can make more revenue. There's numbers like 25% more revenue because it's laser focusing sales in the right areas and marketing. Although interestingly, physical retail outlets that are dog friendly apparently make 25% more revenue. So the other category is the relatively new one with large language models is generative AI. And that's the ChatGPTs of the world. It's predictive text or predictive image, but actually what has emerged out of what initially started to be a pretty fundamental thing, a pretty simple thing, which was predicting text, has emerged something much, much bigger. It feels like a real kind of intelligence. It's not really. It is a predictive machine in nature, but it's not predicting the next words. It's predicting the next sentence, paragraph, even an entire book. And where that comes in as a business benefit is efficiency and a productivity booster, a massive productivity booster in certain areas. And it doesn't necessarily replace jobs, but people that know how to use AI, as Gareth said, will be more effective and more productive than those that don't. And businesses that take advantage of it will have that boost. So when you think of things like, image generation, these tools can create pretty good logos, the pretty good icons, images for your presentations. And a relatively new area is video. And, that's going to get pretty good and pretty interesting as well. All of that, to come back to your question about security, privacy, ethics, and compliance, all of that plays into it. So right at the very beginning, you've got to consider when you bring in these tools, whether it's big data prediction or generative AI, what are you using it for? What are the use cases? Are those use cases ethical? So you might be able to collect a lot of data from your physical retail outlets or online to use in big data analysis. But is it ethical to do so? What kind of data are you taking? CCTV images of people walking around stores. Possible, but is it ethical? Is it legal? Different jurisdictions have different rules on that. So you need to know, is what you're doing ethical and legal within the jurisdictions that you work in. When it comes to generative AI, you're then talking about the data used for the models. So mostly, I would imagine most organizations, they use the out-of-the-box model. Your open AI or your Claude, your Geminis with Google and Microsoft Azure AI. They are out-of-the-box models. You are trusting through the contract with the third party that they have trained those models ethically and legally and compliantly. There are some court cases on that have gone through, but it does appear that the dust is settling, and certainly some of the newer models coming out from these organisations, they have considered that, they've readdressed it, and they are very transparent about that. Some of the new legislation that's come through on AI is about transparency. It's also about use cases and risk assessing those use cases. And certainly the one that came out fairly recently, the EU one, is very easy to follow the flowchart for your use case to identify, is it a high risk use case? Is it compliant with that? Is there anything you need to do? And I would say for most organizations, 90% of what they're going to use these models for is low risk. You've then got just the kind of ethics of what you're doing in the business with it, because there are some areas where technically you could replace jobs. Depending on what you've got. If you've got some individuals, say, writing up meeting notes, summarizing lengthy meetings, well, you can now automate that. You still need someone to do it, but you can do it much more efficiently. So that means people at work are going to be worried about these things. So what do you do about that? Well, you've got to be transparent, communicate what you're doing, and be clear. And as I said earlier, these are productivity boosters, and they're for efficiency. They still need people behind it. They still need people doing it. Those people have got to be trained. They've got to know what they're doing to get the best out of it. But the other element of it is you can take an out-of-the-box large language model that does what it does, but now you can give it some additional training yourself. So businesses can feed it data, and again, you would need to know you need to consider the ethics and legality of that. Are you allowed to feed it that data? So that it can be a bit more tuned to what you want it to do. And an example would be a chatbot that your customers can use on your website, and you want it to be able to answer questions about your product. But with that comes some risk that you'd have to understand and some testing that you'd have to do. And there's been a couple of retailers who've fallen foul of failing to kind of lock it down into its special room. And it's been able to break out of that room and use its background model. So, and the outcome of that was, I believe, someone was able to negotiate the price of, I think it was a car, down to $1, which was legally binding, I believe. And there was another one where you could make silly poems. Now, not particularly worrying, silly poems, but it wasn't its intended use. And, there's potential risk with that. So with, it's very exciting. The business benefits are very real, but you've got to consider ethics and the legal aspect and compliance as well as new legislation starts to come out.
Yeah, I'm seeing more and more clients ask me for AI policies. So they want policies to give to their employees to guide them in the use of AI and when to, when not, and the considerations that they need to have before using AI. And I think that's quite interesting, because I think up until now, it's just been a bit of like free range. It's like, oh, great, new shiny tools, let's get on and use them and see what benefit they can bring. But I think there is starting to be that recognition that they need to be able to do it in a more structured, safe way. Do you feel you're supported, your team's supported from that legal compliance perspective?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're very conscious around customer data and brand integrity as a business. So I think our North Star is always, is this going to damage our brand integrity and what we stand for? And is our customer data safe? Because really, as a retailer, you've only got a couple of things. You've got your retail DNA, whatever makes your product better, or your stance or your brand values resonate in the market. And then you've got, the people who get to do that for you. So we are conscious of it. I think that I agree with you, Graham, that there's a couple of different routes that we take with it. What we don't do is upload our business data into large language models that are open, because they're feeding on the same data, and therefore when other people ask questions, it will rely back on that because they're learning. So a lot of the internal business processes are large language models that are closed. They've got rails around them. Now, there's some policy pieces in that as well. Most businesses couldn't afford to fuel their own large language model or build one. Frankly, it would take too much computing power, too much time and energy when you've got to concentrate on the retail aspects of your business.
ChatGPT supposedly cost $4 million in electricity to train the original model. So you can't do these in a back room.
Absolutely not. The processing power. Often what we would do is we'd piggyback on the back of some other cloud source that we'd already used to put closed group models accessible to our business to learn within it. And then we know we've got control over it. And then the piece that underpins all of it is this data piece. And for most retailers, one of their biggest sources of data, as you say, Graham, is their customer data. So we've been talking about protection and privacy of customer data for many years. So most retailers are quite advanced, I think, in their understanding about that. They'll have security leads, they'll have, legal advice around that, what they're keeping, what they're holding on people, how long they keep it for, how they're utilising it. So I think you don't have to make a huge leap here. Like I say, if you use it as a tool to augment the policies and procedures that you've already got, then often the base model is pretty secure.
I was going to add to you mentioned policy. So there's two aspects that you should consider with AI. One is your privacy policy, say on your website, that if you use AI for processing data, to have that updated and be transparent with that. But the other one is an employee policy, and if you already, and you should already, have an information security policy hand in hand with an acceptable use policy. And what I'd certainly find that there's a strong link with is to put generative AI into acceptable use. So you've got an acceptable use of generative AI policy, and you can then be clear that your staff aren't allowed to use public large language models, public generative AI, when processing company data, because you don't know what they're doing with it. Is it being used to train the model? Is it, do the employees of that third party have visibility of all the prompts you're putting in, which might contain sensitive data, all of that. So you can just say, don't do that. And the costs of private large language models, so the big software companies, they have them. Google, OpenAI, Amazon got them now with Claude from Anthropic, and Microsoft. And Microsoft is very, very big on the AI at the minute. So there are lots of options, some of them fairly inexpensive and some of them pretty expensive. But there are options that you can look at. So when securing your data and being compliant is a major thing for your business, you can, with a bit of money behind it, you can guarantee that security and that privacy of both your prompts and any data you're processing.
I think it would be really good now. We've talked quite a lot about AI and how it's being used in businesses right now, but shall we do a bit of crystal ball gazing and look into the future? I know, Gareth, you've just recently come back from the South by Southwest Festival in Texas. Is it in Texas?
Texas.
Austin, Texas. So I wondered if you could just talk to us about some of the takeaways, some of the things that you saw there, things that were being talked about. What do businesses need to know? What's on the horizon?
Well, I'm a big fan of this interactive festival because it's probably the only tech conference that really does try to bring together all the strands of technology and look further into the future than now. So it's not use cases for today. It's more about what's happening and what's on the event horizon. When I started going there 10 years ago, there was a talk that said nothing that's going to come into the hands of consumers is new for the next 5 years, because most of the tech and the architecture that's been worked on took about 5 years to come into consumer hands. So therefore for businesses, particularly retail or customer focusing businesses, really you had quite a long trajectory in. I think that the most exciting part of being in technology at the moment is we're at a real inflection point. There was an inflection point with the internet revolution, should we say, very much the industrial revolution before it, and there was a big gap. And then there was the internet revolution. Only 35 years ago, the internet and the IP protocols that made that, possible came into being. And that's actually pretty short time ago, considering how fast things have advanced. Things are advancing exponentially. A lot of people in tech talk about Moore's law, about the transistors on the microchip doubling every 2 years, and that's an example of exponential growth. I think that exponential growth now is being affected by 3 different converging technologies that are all happening at the same time. The internet happened in isolation. There wasn't multiple technologies emerging at the same time for the revolution. I think at this point we've got 3 important technologies all advancing exponentially and working together to drive that fast growth. The first is AI in all its forms. The second is biotech. Now, not something I'm an expert in at all, but the advancements in biotechnology are moving at the same pace as computing technology. And for people like me in retail technology, obviously it's not an expert area, but I think it's an interesting area to understand the impacts that then plays back into the AI. And then the third area is, it depends what you want to call it. I call it spatial computing, but the Internet of Everything is what it's called, or sensors of everything. So if to give you an example of some of those things, we talked about AI a lot, biotech and advancements of mapping DNA and using AI to solve medical problems and mapping out the DNA of molecules is advancing our ability to manipulate those chemicals in a way that we've never seen before. And the AI is being used to model and predict where we should move those sorts of things forward. There's a lot of, this is really space age stuff, but, in biotechnology for computers, so organoids and, silicon as the base for our computing power will run out as we need more and more computing power. You've seen NVIDIA's, stock price go through the roof, and, the demand for GPUs in the world is going to start a race between the US and China on how to do that. And the only way to get beyond that silicon GPU usage for these models is to go into bio. So starting to think about how we use stem cells to grow transistors to fuel computers. Now, that's a little bit further out, and obviously something that I'm as a business not worrying about now, but interesting in understanding the computing power that's needed to run these things. At the moment, it's just doing text and a bit of imagery. Once it can start doing action, so large action models will be the next breakthrough that comes out from large language models, and we'll see an absolute explosion in sensor data being fed into these models over the next 2 years. And we've started with it. Most people have got an Apple Watch or maybe a Ring or something like that that's feeding data back into these models. And that's not just images and text, that's actions. One of the sort of super cool things that was at the festival that made me, exciting about tech when I was in my, early teens is that the Voight-Kampff test in Blade Runner, at the start of Blade Runner, where they're checking the dilation of the pupil for a blush response to see what emotional state people are in. Well, these new face computers, like the Vision Pro from Apple, is basically a face computer, have got so many sensors on them, they're tracking the pupil. Now, the pupil reacts before you've had that emotion. So if we can feed that back into a large action model, the computer will know what you're going to feel before you feel it. And that's very real in the amount of data. And it's a good example of the data that's now having to be processed and therefore the impact on the computing power. So I think that the exponential growth of those 3 technologies, and then you bring it back to sort of, feet on the ground, planet Earth. What does that actually mean for us as a business? One of the things that's really interesting is there's a big friction between the way that businesses think and the way that technology advances. So the way that businesses think and the way the human brain thinks is linear. If you walk 30 paces, you know where you're going to get to. So your business model, your business plan tends to be, well, I know where I've been for the last 5 paces. I'm going to do this for my next 5 paces, and that's where I'm going to get to. Exponential thinking, 30 paces takes you to the moon. So it's a very different way of trying to think about how you have to evolve your business rapidly. And, 5-year plans on technology, they're like madness. You've no idea, really, because the human brain can hardly comprehend the exponential growth. So there's a friction between business strategy and technology growth. What's great for people coming into the workplace is it's easier because they are absorbed in the change curve. But for people who are leaders of businesses who often have much more experience and therefore predictably a bit older, that understanding the pace of change and the pace of change of things that they'll have to do about their business. I think that the key thing really coming out of it is all the stuff that you need to be as a great leader or a great business still holds true. The people who, have a strong brand ethic, who look after their people, who make sure that everything is, buttoned down in the right way from a legal point of view, are always going to be more successful. I think the human element of curiosity and the keeping an open mind to how this technology can affect your business is crucial at the moment. And they were some of the big things that came out of South by. I think it was more about, we're going to move beyond prompts with AI, and it's going to become much more of a natural interface. At the moment, the people who know how to use AI very well know how to do good prompts. Because, if you've played with ChatGPT, you've really got to know how to ask the question to get really great answers from it. But you learn that quite rapidly through trial and error. I think as that advances, it'll be more natural interface through just speech. We'll all have personal assistants. We all have personal assistants anyway, whether you've got a, Alexa or a whatever listening to you in your house, or you're using Siri. And these personal assistants will be the sort of main, I think, interface that people will start to bridge that gap with prompt understanding, how to ask the computer to do what you need the computer to do so you can keep doing the stuff that you want to do. So I think lots of good stuff. I mean, it's a very exciting time to be in technology, I think. You've got to stay curious. The pace of change is rapid. There's multiple different innovations all colliding at the same time. That I think in 15 years' time, we'll look back at this whole period of time between sort of 1985 to probably 2030 as a transition period in our understanding and the way that we use technology to fuel our lives. And it spills over into many things beyond retail. This can solve much bigger problems than how to sell more handbags and shoes, which is the problem I have in my job, right? It's being used in biotechnology, age enhancement, and lots of environmental work as well. When I started in computing in 1990, we were using the first big computers to model El Nino systems for the first time. It was the first time you could get your hands on modeling those geographical systems. Roll forward just 30, 40 years. And, the possibility of understanding that stuff and therefore making proper actionable change is much more, beyond the retail area of the world, I guess.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges for businesses with so many different technologies, advancements, is where to invest, where to focus. I talked at the beginning about blockchain and the metaverse. I mean, these were terms that were being talked about all the time, and people were like, this is going to happen. We're going to all be living in the metaverse. We're all going to be putting our headsets on and sitting in a dark room just living in the metaverse. So first of all, where have they gone? Is that's now no longer the reality? But also, how as a business do you prioritize? How do you know where to invest?
I think it's a really good question, and I think a lot of people can get very distracted by shiny new toys, notwithstanding myself as well, in tech. But to answer the question about metaverse specifically, it's not gone away. It's just not had its ChatGPT moment yet. The amount of work and investment that's going into a number of emerging technologies, I guess, that need to come together at the right time are all moving at different paces. So, everyone wanted to try and rush into NFTs. NFTs were a big thing for 6 months. Everyone thought it was the way that we were going to have to, all brands had to create these, tokens that people were going to have in their digital wallets. And that's some people rushed to it.
A non-fungible token.
That is
meaning, thank you.
Meaning that a physical object is given a kind of digital certificate that can be traded and owned.
It's effectively an identification of something that appears on the blockchain. Okay. So because it's built on blockchain technology, it can't be transmuted and it can only be transferred by agreement. So it's a very secure way. So some of the areas that I think have got good use cases for this, like vintage cars or vintage watches, something that has a very high value. You could have a blockchain representation of registration that's attached to that physical object that you can trade at the same point as you trade it, that also acts as a certificate of authenticity, but also of ownership. The nice thing about the blockchain technology is it's peer-to-peer. So some of the other technologies that are emerging at the time, decentralized web was one of the big things that underpinned Metaverse. Now that scared the hell out of the big four tech companies because, of course, they own all of it at the moment. And so there's no surprise that they didn't back a decentralized web that was based on blockchain that allowed peer-to-peer transactions, ownership of your own data to exchange with a third party. They want to be the middleman of this stuff. So I think that there's no surprise.
But there is a risk with that decentralization. They call the 51% attack, where although it's decentralized, it's still physical machines that somebody owns, and there's a finite number, even if it's a very large number. And all an adversity needs to do, same with blockchain, which is bits of information spread across thousands and thousands of computers, is an adversary's got enough funding, can create enough machines, enough servers that even they now own 51% of the thing. And if they own 51%, that's the majority. So trust becomes owned by those that own that 51%. So there's still, it's not the decentralization isn't always the answer.
No, I agree.
It always boils down to
I'm a big
who do you
anti-tech
trust.
firm people. So I've been in tech. I always want to try and break down those trillion-dollar companies that have got rich on people's data and selling it to other people. There must be a better way than that. There are many privacy browsers. I was watching the TV, which I rarely do, real TV, the weekend, so I had to watch adverts, which is very annoying for me because I do everything to block adverts and everything that I do digitally. And they're actually advertising ad-blocking web browsers and search engines on the TV now. That was quite a revolution to me. I was like, my gosh, there's an advert telling you not to use Google, use this other company because they're not going to track your data as much. So I think there's a lot of change occurring. I don't think the metaverse has gone away. I think it hasn't had its commercial moment yet. I think some of the barriers to public adoption are, quite high. The Vision Pro headset's $3,500. I mean, that's a big investment for anybody. No, that's much as a car. People aren't going to go out and do that. Only the people that are playing with it. So I think it needs a moment to come through. I think that the blockchain is crucial in part of how we build our architecture from a technology point of view going forward. I think it's been taken over by crypto a bit, and the fintechs have sort of monopolized the way that people think about blockchain. And I think that that's another bit of a problem for it to emerge. So it was really fun that it had this moment. I'm a big online gamer, so I love the fact that, we're all in the metaverse. Everyone understands they've got multiple personalities presented in different places. The old memes that came up of your profile in Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn were very different people. You already have multiple personalities that you're putting into a digital space. So the leap to that sort of virtual space. People use Facetune on Zoom. Even on FaceTime, when you're FaceTiming your family or your friends, it's got eye tracking, so it looks like you're looking at the camera, and people don't have a problem with this sort of technology. They think it's a benefit. That's all sort of part of the runway into the metaverse. I don't think it's ready. It hasn't had its ChatGPT moment yet.
Coming now just to a bit of a summary to close, what would your summary message be to businesses right now who are grappling with all the new tech, if you had just a few sentences of advice to give them? Gareth, do you want to take that one first?
Know where you are on your evolution of technology. Know what's important to you to do. We've all got a certain amount of capital expenditure to make, so choose wisely and think further in the future for your tech architecture than you are currently.
Great, thank you. Graham?
There's an Einstein quote I always go back to on it, which is, in theory and practice are the same, but in practice they're not. So I think when it comes to technology, really understand it, understand your use cases and the benefits, and invest wisely.
Great, thank you. Good advice from you both. As we've been doing this series of podcasts looking at ESG, our last guest, Duncan Spark from the marketing agency Man Bites Dog, Good name. He left a question for you, Gareth. So you can answer this from a tech AI perspective. But what are you most proud of in terms of the sustainability journey that your business has been on? What part of that journey are you most proud of right now?
I think I always will bring it back to the technology, and it's how we're trying to use technology to get more transparency on a lot of this. So whether that's supply chain management, whether it's understanding energy efficiency in our stores, I think we're utilising some of the digital prowess to try and get that data more readily accessible so that we can move forward to action quicker.
Brilliant. Well, for our next podcast in the series, we're going to be talking with Ebony Kuo, who's a strategic lead business partner at JD Sports. And she specialises, and we're going to be talking about the emergence of equality, diversity and inclusion as an important topic for businesses and particularly the board. So, Gareth, do you have a question for Ebony that we can ask her in our next podcast?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty obvious question for me, but in an area that probably people don't see overlap in, I think is how can technology and particularly the emergence of AI help you understand where you sit and how to move forward with inclusivity, diversity in your organisation?
Well, brilliant question. I'm really looking forward to hearing Ebony answer that one in our next Business But Better podcast, brought to you by Irwin Mitchell. Hope you've enjoyed listening today. So it just leaves me to thank you for listening. Thank you to our guests for chatting with me about everything around tech. And don't forget, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so you make sure that you don't miss any more of our podcasts in this series.